Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Now in the past you've seen me make some front-end UI frameworks, Amponent, Merced UI. All of these you can find over there at alexmercedcoder.com in the libraries section. Now what I did this last week is I created my own backend framework. I was really interested in understanding sort of like how Express works more under the hood and really understanding the raw Node HTTP library. So I built my own framework. So this video here, we're going to teach you how to use my framework. I created some tools to make it easy to use and figured why not show you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my terminal. And for you to spin up your own project, you just use npx merced spinup, which is my spinup tool. Merced spinup, M-E-R-V-E-R, Merver, that's a template, that's the framework. So this will spin up a template. So this way you don't have to like figure out what the folder structure should be. All the main files you'll need will be in place and ready to go. So npx merced spinups, and we're just going to call this merv practice will be the name of this folder. So I'll hit enter on that. Cool. Now I will cd into that folder, cd merv practice. Okay, do an npm install all the dependencies. I'm going to get rid of the git, sudo rm-r.git, because again, you cloned it, so you're going to have a git folder in there. So you want to get rid of that git repository. Okay, I'm going to clear the terminal. And let's take a look. Okay, so you have your server.js, and see the server.js is pretty straightforward. It brings in the Merver object, except see it's from my library. It brings in the config object that configures the server, and you just create a new Merver with the config object, and you listen. Cool. So essentially everything about how the server works is all going to be in that config object. So in that case, really, you don't need to change anything here. Really, the next step is going to be this config object. Okay, so here's our server configuration object. Let me drag this down. So here are all the different things you can kind of tinker around with. So here's the port. So what port is it going to serve on? The responder and the middler. The responder is an object that handles all your routes. So we'll go into that in a second. The middler is an object that handles all your middleware. Okay? They are going to be in the middleware and controls folder respectively. Here are your CORS headers. So if you wanted to change sort of like, your CORS permissions, that's where you would do that. These are some timeouts. So this is like the timeout for middleware to complete. So if you need to make sure that, let's say your middleware is doing a lot of asynchronous tasks, so you need to kind of give it a little extra time to complete those tasks, you can do the timeout here. Same thing here for your routes. So if you're using something like Mongo or Postgres, where you're making these asynchronous database calls, this should take care of it, 200 milliseconds. But if you want, you can lower it, increase it. And if you don't really need, if you're not really doing any asynchronous actions in there, you can lower this to 0 and it'll work. This is cache, so this is like for caching static files. If you are serving static files, this is the determine, are you serving static files, serve static. And then this is the folder that would be serving the static files if you choose to do so. Okay, and then there's the public folder. Cool, so that's essentially that configures the server. And then here's the middleware. So in the middleware, all it is we create this middler object, which handles middleware. This is the global middleware. So basically anything in this middler object will run before your routes, okay, in the order that they're registered. So basically what you do is you create a middler object, and then you just keep registering middleware. Okay, and the syntax for middleware here is a little bit different than it is in Express. You don't have to have this next function. You just create a function that gets past the request and response. Okay, and then do what you need to do with the request and response, and then that be that. So here I already have, like, this is just a basic logging middleware, so you can customize this for any kind of logging you want to do. Here I have a body parsing middleware already kind of configured, so that way it parses JSON and URL encoded. Okay, which I should actually probably specify that in the comment. Okay, so those are already set. So you're already good to, so essentially CORS already taken care of. Your logging already taken care of. Body parsing already taken care of. Ability to serve static files already all configured in this template. Cool. Then we go to controllers. This is where your routes would be. So we have this responder. This is the actual responder object. So in the same way that middler is where you register your middleware. Basically, the way it works is that all the middleware gets run before the responder kicks in and runs all the response objects to find how it's going to respond. Okay, so we create this responder object and then we register routes. Okay, so right now we're only registering one set of routes, which is this root object. Okay, and essentially your routes are just an objects. Okay, so you can just go in this responses folder and just make a separate file for your object. So in this case, here, what you do is you make an object, and then you specify an endpoint. So all these routes, all these functions are for this endpoint, and then you put the key is the HTTP verb. So it'll check to see if it matches this endpoint, and then see if there's a function for that particular verb. And if there is, it'll run it. Okay. And yeah, that's kind of how that works. So there really isn't a way to do it where like it works for any verb, so you can't really like do, I mean, you could do it as you could make a middleware, I guess, to do that, but yeah. And yeah, so that's the route. So here we have like a get, a post, a put, a delete, and see all of them. This one's returning HTML. So there's two functions you have: res.html if you want to send back an HTML string, and res.json if you want to send back a JSON object. Okay, I don't have like a res.send, so you can send back text. I just feel like anything you really need to do, you can probably do with the HTML and the JSON. Okay, even I could just send the string over as a HTML string, and that would still do the trick. Okay, so that's why I did not necessarily include a res.send function, but you can always build one. Okay, technically, you could just make a piece of middleware that adds additional res functions prior to the routes being run, if you want. But that's it. So if I want to create so basically that's the template. Okay, so again, your middleware is where you define your middleware. Your controllers is where you define your routes. Your routes are just an object. So the way I'd recommend doing it is going in responses, making a new file for that endpoint or bundle of endpoints. Each endpoint gets an object that defines the endpoint and the functions depending on the verb. And you could have, like for example, let's do this. Let's create one new file, root with root param. We'll call it root param.js, because eventually what this will do is module.exports equals endpoint. The endpoint is going to be a slash with my param. Okay, so basically URL params do work here. I did eventually figure out how to get this to work. Pretty happy with my solution, or at least, you know, felt proud that I figured it out. So basically, let's try it. Get, oh, that's gotta be uppercase. Get, okay, and that's gonna be rec res. So if you've written express routes, this should seem pretty familiar. Rec res dot JSON rec dot params dot param, or we'll just console log rec dot params, or return as JSON. So let's try that out. Cool. So we created that route, but I only created the object, so now I have to go register the route. So I'm gonna go to responder. Okay, I need to import that one. So const root param equals require dot slash responses slash root param, and then that brings in the file. Then I just register it. So responder dot new response root param. Cool. And again, it's going to check the routes in the order that you put them here. Keep that in mind. Okay. So save. So now what we'll do is we'll just run the server. So it'll be npm. I have two scripts. So if I go to package.json, we'll see two scripts, start and dev. I'll just type in npm run dev and see it's listening on port 3000. So let's go to the browser. Let's go to localhost 3000. Let's just take a look at the root route first. It works. Now let's see if our new URL param route works. Cheese. And there you go. See, param cheese. Hello. Okay. And of course you have URL queries as well. So cheese equals Gouda. So right now you're not going to see it, but let's alter the route. So I'm going to kill, nope, wrong. Let's kill the server. Let's change that route, root param. Okay, so let's make this an object that has params, and then has that object there, and then another one that's called queries, and has a rec.query in there. Okay. So let's run npm run dev. Like adding the query object was a lot easier than the params, because like Node has like built-in stuff for like pulling the URL and parsing out the queries, while the rec.params you had to kind of create the logic that breaks up the strings, compares like the route endpoint to the actual URL that comes in, recognizes the param, matches it up, creates the object. It was a little bit trickier, but with some work we got it. Okay, so now if I do this, okay, so see, cheese, Gouda, param, hello. Okay, so you do have access to like the same kind of stuff that you would in Express. So overall, like the overall design flow is a little bit not that all that different than what you're used to in Express, or really any Node backend framework, because it all kind of works off the same underlying HTTP library, which kind of all resolves around you creating a server, which gets passed, which has a callback that gets passed request and response, and then you do stuff. So, but yeah, you can pretty much build a full. I built a full API. I built one with using Mongo as well. It works, and you can change your ports pretty easily. It's pretty easily configured. Things like all your basic setup stuff is set up pretty straightforward. So I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. And actually, here, let's try out that static serving. So let's go over here. Test.html. Okay. Oh, because it's treating that as a param. Got it. Not perfect. Okay. So in that case, let me get rid of that route. Okay. Because again, the routes, basically the way the flow it works is that first it's the middleware, then it's the responses, and then the responses you can't attach a separate middleware object. So if you want a separate chain of middleware to run before a particular endpoint, okay, you can actually create a new middleware object, register middleware with that middleware, and then add it as a property on your responses. So basically I would add, like, let's go back to controllers, responses. Like here I would just add like another property called middleware. And then I would just create like a new whatever object, and it would run that middleware before the route gets run, if that property exists. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this now cheese/param. Okay. So this way it doesn't capture that route. Okay, npm run dev. Okay. So now if I go test.html, see there's the static file, and then if I go to cheese/hello, there's a query, but I didn't attach a query to it, so let me add a query. My words equal palabra. Okay, so it works. It does all the basic stuff. Okay, so far the only tweak I'd like to add to it right now is that what we saw earlier, making sure that it can tell the difference between sort of like a file name versus getting confused with a URL param. Although that's an easy enough thing to kind of work around, like not run into. But aside from that, it should capture pretty much. I put a lot of error handling into it, so it should catch, like if you sit there and send, and if I go to some URL that doesn't exist. So if I go to hello/Yoda, okay, see I get an error, 404 not found. If I go like Yoda.html, still thing. Okay, it'll just I should get 404 errors when necessary. Like, pretty much I think I've shut down all paths to like causing a runtime error that'll cause the server to stop running. So overall, should be some pretty secure, pretty configurable, pretty straightforward. So that's the Merver framework. It's open source, so feel free to like, if you want to like fork it and make some edits and make a pull request, that's welcome. And that goes for all my libraries. I'm always welcoming people who would like to get some, pull request credits to see if they can improve upon any of my libraries and make them cooler and better. So have a great day. My name's Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.